Hey coders, ready for your next program? This one I think may challenge you a little bit. It's a little bit tricky, but I think you can do it. We're going to call this one SpaceChase. So you should rename your file. Don't spell it wrong like I did. SpaceChase. Okay, here's the program we want to make. We want to have a background that looks kind of spacey. And let's say there is a dog, a pet dog that's out exploring, and it's being a little bit naughty. It keeps running away. And so our robot needs to catch the dog. The problem is that it's kind of crazy out in space and it's hard to control where you're going. And so the robot and the dog may be moving around, but we definitely want something to happen when the robot catches the dog. This program is going to use input, so it'll sense when you push a button on the keyboard. This program will use motion. We're going to introduce something called glide. And let's see, this program will have sprites and events. I think that's a pretty good introduction for what we're doing. Okay, so first thing we want is a background that looks kind of spacey. So come over here to the backdrop option. We're just going to choose the backdrop. Come all the way down to the bottom here. Oh man, oh yeah, nebula, that's the one I want. So it's not at the bottom, it's in the middle. Find the one that says nebula, click on that. See, nice and spacey, look at that. Alright, so now let's add our sprites. Like I said, we're going to want a dog that moves around and a robot that moves around. Let's have the dog first. So click on this one that says choose a sprite. And that dog we want is right here, Dot. We want the dog named Dot. Now Dot has some different costumes. I don't know that we'll use those today though, so we'll probably just stick with this one. I think it'll work for our purposes. Okay, and let's go ahead and add our robot. It's down to the R's, I think. Robot, yeah, let's do this guy. He's got steam shooting out that helps him fly around space. We'll have him start over here. Okay, so we want our program for when something happens, these guys are both going to move around kind of randomly because it's hard to fly in space. And if they end up in the same spot where they're touching each other, then we want something to happen. So right now, if we hit the green flag, what'll happen? Nothing, because we haven't attached any code to the sprites yet. The code's going to be pretty similar for both of these, but let's start with Dot. We're going to use an event. This one I thought would be interesting. Instead of doing the green flag, we're going to use this one that says when space key pressed. And this will be a little bit tricky for me, or for you, because you're not going to see me bring the mouse over here. I'm just going to hit the keyboard, and you'll have to trust that that's what I'm doing. But that's what I'm doing. So when the space bar is pressed, that's what's going to trigger, that's the event, that's the input, that's going to trigger our program to start. And what do we want Dot to do when the space bar happens? Well, that's pretty easy. We're just going to come to motion, and we're going to pick this one that says glide 1 second to, and then it says random position. And you can change this around to the mouse pointer. You can glide it straight to the robot. That makes it a little bit silly. We're going to leave it on random, and watch what happens when I hit the space bar. Now random position means out of all the places on here on the screen, on the stage where it could go, there's not going to be a pattern to where it decides to go. The program itself is going to decide, it could be X, Y, it could be over here, it could be over here, it could be over there. It could be right next to where it is. But every time you hit the space bar, for 1 second, it'll slowly move towards that random spot. So let's hit the space bar a few times. You'll notice the further away it goes, the faster it goes. That's because it has to get there in 1 second. Whether it's close or far, it takes exactly 1 second to get there. Okay, so is that working? Every time I hit the space bar, Dot, the space dog, randomly moves around the screen. Yeah, it does. Okay, so our robot here is going to have similar code. You could drag this over to the robot, or let's just come to the robot and bring the same code over here. We're going to want that glide 1 second to random position, and we're going to click on control, and no, I just lied to you. Click on events, sorry, and drag over when spacebar key is pressed. Okay, so I have these blocks of code here. I have the exact same blocks of code here. What do you think will happen when I hit the spacebar? Well, if you guessed that they would both move, that would be wrong, because they don't both move. Can you think for a second what's wrong with the code on my robot sprite? Here's dots, here's the robot. If you guessed, well, they have to be connected, you're exactly right. Because without them being connected, they don't actually go together. So now the robot says, when the space bar is pressed, glide 1 second to random position. Now the robot works. Okay, how's that looking? They're both flying around space, kind of hard to control. The point of the game is for the robot to catch the dog, bring him safely back to the spaceship. Now we wanted something to happen in our code when the robot caught the dog. So let's think about that for a second. We don't want it to happen every time, only when he's touching the dog. But so, well, let's do this first. Let's put in this say hello for 2 seconds. So it's under the looks, say hello for 2 seconds. We want it to say got you for 2 seconds. Now, when I hit spacebar, the program works, right? It says got you, but what if they're not actually touching? We don't want it to say got you when the dog is still flying off in space. So we need to introduce something that's called a conditional. A conditional, say that, conditional. Conditional just means it's checking to see if a condition is true. In other words, is something we want to look for actually there or not? So what we wanted to look for is this dog touching this, is this robot touching this dog? That's the condition we want to check for. So let's go to the robot code, and that's actually a control issue. Okay, so if you click on control, we need to grab this one right here with the hexagon. Yeah, that's a hexagon. With the hexagon here that says if hexagon, then something. And we want this say got you for 2 seconds. So we've got our code started here, but it's not going to work right now because we need to fill in this box here. So think about that for a second. What do we need to put into our code here that it needs to check for before it says got you? Well, the answer is we need to see if these two are touching, right? Well, that is actually, let's come back to the robot. That's under the sensing option right here. So under sensing, if you click on sensing, this sprite will sense different things. You can sense if it's touching different colors. You can just see how far away it is from the mouse. You can do different things here. See if a button is down. We want this top one. Now it says touching mouse pointer, which is not what we want. We don't want the robot to say got you if it's touching the mouse pointer. I mean, that does work, but we wanted to see if it's touching the dog. And so on the robot sprite, we're going to click on this little down triangle and change that. I don't want it to be touching the mouse pointer. I want it to check to see if it's touching the name of this sprite here, which is dot. Okay, let's look at our code for a second. If on the dog we didn't change anything, when the space button is pressed, pick a random spot to go to and glide there in 1 second. Same with the robot. If the space bar is pressed, pick a random spot to go to, glide there in 1 second. But after that happens, check to see if the sprite is touching dot. And if it is, then do what's inside here. And what is it going to do? It's going to say, got you, for 2 seconds. Okay, let's hit the space bar and see what happens. And space is hard. Gotta catch that. Hey, look at that. Now that the two sprites are touching, this conditional was true, and so we saw the results of the code where it said got you for 2 seconds. So now our dog and robot can get safely back to the spaceship. Do you see how this program used sensing and conditionals and input? This is a great little program. So here's a challenge for you, boys and girls, ways to make this more interesting. I'm going to show you real quick. If you increase this number right here, it'll make the robot go really slow. And you missed him. Okay, so here's my challenge for you. How could you make it go really fast? How could you make the robot go slow or fast and the dog go slow and fast? What if you made the dog smaller or bigger, or the robot smaller or bigger? Those are different ways you can change this program. Here's a different way too. What if you, instead of just the dog flying around, you added also a cat? So find a cat sprite and change your program to say something different for if it catches the dog than if it catches the cat. That would be pretty simple to do, and I dare you to give it a chance, or give it a try. Good luck, coders.